Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about accessory work and why we do it. And the reason that we do it comes down to the fact that size equals strength. Now, this creates confusion when this topic comes up because some people are like, well wait a minute. So you saying that if you get stronger, that you'll get bigger, or are you saying that if you get bigger, you'll get stronger? Yes. People say, wait, which one? Yes, both of them. They're both true. You can't really separate the two, not to a very large degree. And here's ultimately what I'm talking about. If you do nothing but maximum strength work, right? Nothing but maximum strength work, you will get stronger up to a point, but you will reach thresholds to where it will be difficult. It will get much, much slower. I mean, things like traditional Bulgarian training. If I started you right now, taught you guys the basic lifts, and you did 4 exercises to maxes every day with almost no other work, you would get bigger and stronger, but it would slow down. And eventually it would become very, very, very slow. And by that same token, you guys can do a bunch of a routine built basically around what we would think of as accessory movements. All right, like what I'm doing in this video here, a bunch of high rep incline bench, high rep rows, high rep laterals, hammer curls, all the things you guys see me kind of doing in this video, accessory movements. They're there just to create easier hypertrophy, metabolic fatigue, but we're not necessarily focused on movement patterns. We're just focused on thickening up weak links, right? When you have guys who don't do drugs, who do this as we would think of almost as bodybuilding training, if this is all that you do, you will also reach a threshold to where things really and truly slow down. Now, the reason bodybuilders get away with this is drugs, right? They can just use drugs, and they could train like this indefinitely. They could build entire routines around accessory movements and get monstrously big if they're willing to, use significant amounts of chemical enhancement and keep doing it. The problem we ultimately run into is that without additional strength and bigger exercises, you're still going to be very limited in your hypertrophic potential. So there's a continuum between these two things. Now, for me, my only concerns are strength, which is what a big part of my audience is concerned with. But we also have to understand that as you get more advanced, there becomes more of a role and a need for the accessory works to get stronger because you can't separate your size and your strength. And workload generates more hypertrophy, right? We know that. Weight on the bar produces the most peak strength. And I don't mean cheating to get more weight on the bar. I'm talking about literally lifting heavier. Lifting with heavier loads relative to your max gives you usually the fastest strength gains. And the more volume you can do with it, the faster that comes. But hypertrophy is generally a product of volume. Well, volume also has a finite return on it before it starts to slow down progress also, and you start to plateau. In other words, you can't just keep adding sets forever. You can't just keep adding reps forever and never stop growing from it. You're going to reach a threshold where you can't add more workload, or let's say that you just work with 135 on the bench press, right? You use that example, and you get to a point to where you're doing sets of 30 on it. You're going to reach a threshold to where your maximum recoverable volume is going to become a problem, to where just the sheer amount of training volumes you're doing, you don't recover from enough to grow from it, even though you're adding more volume for more hypertrophy. There's a recovery versus growth window. And so there's a balance to be struck there. It's a balance to be struck. So as we become more advanced, what do we find? We just can't generate enough workloads on our big exercises to get everything that we need. We reach a point to where our big exercises, the exercises that made you as a novice gain that first 15 to 20 pounds of muscle, right? Those basic exercises, usually your primary exercises, they will put an enormous amount of size on you in your first year in the gym, maybe even your first year and a half. In fact, you don't really have to do anything else. If you just come in and train squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press, rows, pull-ups, stuff like that hard enough, you'll gain maximum muscle. But you will eventually reach a threshold to where it's just too hard to recover from doing a huge amount of fatigue on them. We start to develop weak points on them, and we reach a point to where you can only handle so many total sets, right? I mean, there's a point to where when you start doing 20 heavy sets of squats every week and 20 heavy sets of bench press every week, where you're just simply struggling to recover from that stuff. And you still have weak points in there. And what you usually find is that works well for the novice lifter, right? Novice lifter can do 10 sets of squats, 10 sets of bench, 10 sets of standing presses, throw in some deadlifts and rows or chin-ups in there. They'll get jacked as long as there's progressive overload there. They'll get really jacked for their time in the gym relative to their experience level. So that works fine. But again, as you get more advanced, you run into issues of maximum recoverable volume, how much fatigue you can handle in a given week. Well, these accessory movements that some people would call bodybuilding training, and I don't like to use that term for it, because to me that's not what bodybuilding is. Bodybuilding itself has nothing to do with actually getting big or building your body. It has to do with competing in a show to where you rip down to emaciated levels of body fat, right? That's what bodybuilding is. So I don't always like that term when used with it, but that is what people term it. Well, these sort of things can thicken you up, and they're easier to recover from. In other words, you could come in and do incline benches and rows, and that's easier to recover from than some of your bigger lifts. Or how about these laterals or curls? Right, there's a threshold to where you can only handle so much overhead pressing in a week. What if you're doing 12 sets of heavy deadlifts every week? How much standing pressing can you handle? How much more axial loading can you handle? Not a whole hell of a lot. But you could do some lateral raises, especially with the one arm like this. There's almost no axial loading. Right, you can train your delts further that way. Train your delts further. Same thing with the hammer curls, right? Which you'll see me do here shortly also. What can we do with that? Well, you can only handle so many sets of rows a week, particularly when you're doing a bunch of squatting and deadlifting. You're using up a lot of your recovery resources with the best exercises, the exercises that really help make you strong and big and everything else. Once we start getting brutally strong at them, we do have a finite recovery to how much of that stuff we can handle. Well, what happens if you still need some of these muscles to grow more? All right, we can only handle so many barbell rows. But what if you can still get a little more bicep development, brachialis development, things like that? You can still maybe handle some smaller exercises if your connective tissue can handle it. Right, you can do accessory movements for these things. And accessory movements is a catch-all term. Right, it's a catch-all term for anything that's not a primary exercise. It's there for hypertrophy. And we don't want to get that confused with assistance movements. Right, because we could argue that incline bench is an assistance movement for the bench press. But done with higher reps and lighter weight, it probably isn't. Meaning the bar path and stuff starts to get different. Something to really be an assistance movement, it needs to have a real strength component to it that carries over directly. But these smaller movements are accessory movements. You do them purely to thicken up different parts of your body, whether it's the side delt, the upper chest, the tricep, the hamstring, the abdominals, whatever it is we're trying to do. We're doing these purely for hypertrophy. Why? Because just coming in and doing extra volume, even if it's in a way, in a movement pattern that has no direct strength carryover to other stuff you're doing, it can build thicker support musculature. It can make smaller muscles involved or even bigger muscles involved that might be a weaker link in an exercise, can make them bigger. And if a muscle is bigger, you will be stronger. In other words, the hammer curls right here. If they make your biceps and brachialis bigger, those muscles will get stronger. If those muscles are limiting the amount you can row, you can get them bigger. You might be able to do 10 more pounds on your barbell rows. Even though the barbell rows are also, for many of us, an accessory movement. The concept holds true. You can have accessories for your accessories. But the point is, accessory movements for more advanced lifters start to become valuable when you cannot handle the total amount of workloads, or you're running into risk of overuse injuries by trying to do large amounts of training volume with your primary exercises. And at the end of the day, training volume is one of the primary drivers of hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is one of the biggest factors in strength. Neuromuscular efficiency, technique, all that stuff matters. Speed, strength matters. All these things matter for strength. They absolutely do. But size is still the biggest factor. The size of the muscles involved in any given movement are still going to be the biggest factor. They're going to count for the largest chunk of the amount of strength that you have. And so these sort of things that just come in and do extra volume that you can recover from relatively easily will carry over to your strength. And that's the thing to remember. And that's the mindset that you have behind accessory movements. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.